He was the king of New York, a man who commanded armies with a whisper. But on a rainy Tuesday, Lorenzo Valenti wasn't a don. He was just another bleeding man dying on the floor of a cheap diner. Dozens of people stepped over him. They saw the blood. They saw the expensive suit ruined by gutter water, and they looked away. They didn't want trouble. He was moments away from death, ready to accept that loyalty was a lie. Then a waitress with tired eyes and a stained apron dropped a tray of coffee, knelt beside him, and whispered the one thing that could save his life in a dialect only the highest-ranking Mafia families were supposed to know. That one sentence didn't just save him. It started a war. Rain slashed against the neon sign of Mick's all-night diner, turning the grime of the New York sidewalk into a slick, oily mirror. Lorenzo Valenti stumbled, his hand pressed hard against his left side. The dark wool of his bespoke suit was soaking up the blood, hiding the severity of the wound from the casual observer. But Lorenzo could feel the life draining out of him with every erratic beat of his heart. He had been careful. He was always careful. But the ambush at the warehouse hadn't come from the Russians or the Triads. It had come from inside the house. The bullet that tore through his ribs was fired by a gun he had paid for, held by a hand he had shaken 1,000 times. Stefano. The name burned in his mind, hotter than the lead in his side. His own cousin. His underboss. Lorenzo pushed open the heavy glass door of the diner. A bell jingled a cheerful, annoying sound that clashed with the ringing in his ears. The diner was a graveyard of broken dreams at 2:00 a.m. The air smelled of stale coffee, burnt bacon, and floor cleaner. He swayed, gripping the counter for support. "Table or booth?" a voice drawled. The manager, a man named Mick with grease stains on his shirt that looked like geographical maps, didn't even look up from his racing form. "Help," Lorenzo rasped. His voice was a broken engine. "I need a phone." Mick looked up then. He saw the sweat beading on Lorenzo's forehead, the pallor of his skin, and the way he leaned heavily to the left. But mostly, Mick saw trouble. In this neighborhood, a man bleeding in a suit meant police, and police meant questions Mick couldn't answer about his backroom poker games. "Phone's broken, pal," Mick said, his voice flat. "Kitchen's closed. Get out before I call the cops." Lorenzo looked around the room. A trucker in the corner buried his face in a newspaper. A young couple arguing in a booth fell silent, staring at him with wide, fearful eyes before turning back to their cold fries. No one moved. The bystander effect was in full swing. They saw a dying man, but they categorized him as a drunk or a junkie. Lorenzo's knees buckled. He slid down the front of the counter, hitting the linoleum with a heavy thud. "For Christ's sake," Mick muttered, coming around the counter not to help, but to drag him out. "I just mopped this floor." Lorenzo's vision blurred. The ceiling fan spun lazily, counting down the seconds of his life. He felt the cold hand of death reaching for him, and he cursed his legacy. He was Lorenzo Valenti, the capo dei capi, and he was going to die next to a gumball machine kicked to the curb by a short-order cook. "Maledetti vigliacchi, vi ammazzo tutti," Lorenzo whispered, the Sicilian dialect slipping out in his delirium. "Damn cowards. I'll kill you all." It was a whisper meant for God or the devil, but someone else heard it. A crash of shattering ceramic echoed through the diner. A waitress had dropped a coffee pot. She was small, with dark hair, pulled back in a messy bun, and an apron that had seen better days. She had been invisible to him a moment ago, just part of the scenery. She rushed forward, ignoring Mick's shouting about the broken glass. She dropped to her knees beside Lorenzo. Her hands were rough, her skin smelling of dish soap. She didn't look at his face. She looked at his side, seeing the dark stain spreading. Mick grabbed her shoulder. "Rebecca, leave him. I'm tossing him out." She slapped Mick's hand away with a ferocity that made the large man recoil. She turned her dark eyes to Lorenzo. She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper that cut through the noise of the diner like a razor blade. "Il sangue non si lava con l'acqua, Don Valenti. Si lava con il sangue." Lorenzo's eyes snapped open, fighting the darkness. "Blood is not washed with water, Don Valenti. It is washed with blood." It was an old phrase. A phrase from the old country, specifically from the villages near Corleone. It was a code, a recognition of status, and a promise of vengeance. "Who?" Lorenzo gasped. "Shut up," Rebecca said, in perfect, unaccented English. She looked up at Mick. "He's my uncle. He's diabetic and went into shock. Help me get him to my car, Mick, or I swear to God I'll call the health inspector about the rat droppings in the walk-in freezer." Mick paled. The threat to his business outweighed his fear of the bleeding man. "Fine. Get him out of here." Rebecca hauled Lorenzo up. She was smaller than him by a foot, but she possessed a wiry, desperate strength. She draped his arm over her shoulder, taking his weight. As they stumbled out into the rain, Lorenzo realized two things. First, he might actually live. Second, this waitress knew exactly who he was, and she had just saved the devil. The ride was a blur of neon lights and potholes. Rebecca drove a rusted Honda Civic that smelled of vanilla air freshener and old upholstery. Lorenzo faded in and out of consciousness, clutching a bundle of bar towels Rebecca had pressed against his wound. "Hospital," he muttered. "No," Rebecca said, her eyes glued to the rearview mirror. "You have a bullet in you. Hospitals call the cops call the precinct, and whoever put that hole in you probably owns half the precinct. You're not going to a hospital." Lorenzo tried to laugh, but it came out as a wet cough. She was smart, smarter than half his lieutenants. They arrived at a crumbling brick building in Queens. It was a walk-up 4th floor. The climb nearly finished him. By the time she unlocked the door to apartment 4B, Lorenzo was dragging his feet, his vision tunneling to a pinprick. She dumped him onto a worn beige sofa. The apartment was tiny, a studio with a kitchenette, but it was clean. The walls were adorned with embroidery hoops, displaying intricate flowers and birds, a stark contrast to the blood he was currently smearing on her furniture. "I need whiskey," Lorenzo gritted out, "and a needle." "I have vodka and a sewing kit," Rebecca replied, already moving to the kitchen. She returned with a bottle of cheap vodka, a pair of tweezers, and a lighter. She ripped his shirt open buttons, scattering across the floor. When she saw the wound, she didn't flinch. It was a through and through on the side, missing the major organs, but tearing through muscle. "This is going to hurt," she said, pouring vodka over the wound. Lorenzo roared, his back arching off the sofa. The pain was blinding, white-hot, and absolute. He bit down on his leather belt to keep from screaming again. Rebecca worked with steady hands. She heated the tweezers, digging for debris, then threaded a needle. She stitched him up with the same precision she used on her embroidery hoops. "You have good hands." Lorenzo panted, sweat dripping from his nose. "Where did you learn to stitch a bullet wound?" "I grew up in a neighborhood where people didn't go to hospitals," Rebecca said evasively. She tied off the knot and covered the wound with a clean bandage. "And I know who you are, Lorenzo Valenti. Everybody knows the Valenti family." Lorenzo lay back, exhausted. "You spoke the dialect, in the diner. That wasn't just neighborhood talk. That was Cosa Nostra code. Rebecca stiffened. She turned away to wash the blood off her hands in the tiny sink. My grandmother was from Sicily. She talked a lot. Grandmothers talk about recipes. They don't talk about blood oaths. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed despite his weakness. Who are you, Rebecca? I'm the waitress who just saved your life, she said, turning off the tap. And right now, that's all you need to know. You take the couch. I'll take the chair. Try not to bleed on my pillows. I embroidered those myself. Lorenzo watched her. She sat in a worn armchair by the window, pulling a small revolver out of her apron pocket. It was a snub-nosed .38 old, but well-oiled. She placed it on her lap, watching the fire escape. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a soldier without an army, consult. And for the first time in 10 years, Lorenzo Valenti felt a spark of curiosity that had nothing to do with business. He fell asleep to the sound of rain and the sight of a woman guarding him with a gun that looked like it belonged in a museum. 2 days passed in the small apartment. Lorenzo healed with the unnatural speed of a man who refused to die. The fever broke on the second night, leaving him weak but lucid. Rebecca was a ghost in her own home. She worked double shifts at the diner, leaving him soup and painkillers before she left, and checking his bandages the moment she returned. She spoke little, but Lorenzo watched her. He saw the way she checked the locks 3 times. He saw the way she flinched when a car backfired outside. She was living in fear, hiding from something. On the 3rd morning, Lorenzo sat up. He found his suit jacket cleaned and mended. The bloodstains had been scrubbed out, though the fabric was stiff. "You're leaving?" Rebecca asked. She was standing in the doorway, holding a bag of groceries. "I have been gone too long. My enemies will think I am dead. If they think I am dead, they will start carving up my territory." Lorenzo stood, wincing slightly as the stitches pulled. "I need a phone, Rebecca. A secure one." She hesitated, then reached into a hollowed-out book on her shelf, a copy of The Count of Monte Cristo, and pulled out a burner phone. She tossed it to him. "You come prepared," he noted. "I told you," she said, her voice tight. "I grew up in the life." Lorenzo dialed a number from memory. It rang twice. "Speak," a gravelly voice answered. "Luca," Lorenzo said. There was a silence on the other end, profound and heavy. Then a choked sound. "Boss, we found a body. We thought it was you. Stefano said, Stefano is a liar and a traitor." Lorenzo said, his voice cold iron. "I am Ale. But for now, I am a ghost. Who is with him?" "Half the capos. They think he's the successor. He's calling a meeting tonight at the Masquerade Gala at the Pierre Hotel. He's going to announce the transition." "Good. Gather the men we can trust, the ones who didn't eat from his hand. Meet me at the old warehouse in Brooklyn in 2 hours." Lorenzo hung up. He turned to Rebecca. "I owe you a debt, Rebecca. In my world, a life for a life. Ask me for anything. Money, protection, a ticket to anywhere in the world." Rebecca looked down at her hands. "I don't want your money." "Then what?" "I want justice," she whispered. She looked up, and her eyes were burning with a hate that matched his own. "Stefano Moretti, the man who shot you." Lorenzo froze. "What do you know of Stefano?" "He didn't just betray you, Lorenzo," Rebecca said, stepping closer. 5 years ago, he killed a man in Chicago, a bookkeeper who tried to leave the life. That bookkeeper was my father." The puzzle pieces clicked into place. The dialect, The fear, the gun, the hatred. You are Giovanni Conti's daughter, Lorenzo said softly. Giovanni had been a good man, a numbers genius who wanted out. He had disappeared 5 years ago. Lorenzo had been told it was a rival gang hit. Stefano killed him, Rebecca said, tears welling in her eyes but not falling. I saw him do it. I was hiding in the closet. I ran. I changed my name. I've been waiting. When I saw you in the diner, I knew who you were. I knew that if anyone could kill Stefano, it was you. Lorenzo walked over to her. He reached out and tilted her chin up. You saved me not out of kindness, but for revenge. Does it matter? She challenged. Lorenzo smiled a dangerous wolfish grin that transformed his face. No, it makes me like you even more. You want Stefano. You shall have him, but not as a waitress. He went to the closet where she kept her few meager belongings. Tonight, Stefano celebrates his coronation. We are going to crash the party. But you cannot walk in there as Rebecca the waitress. Tonight you are Rebecca Valenti, my consigliere. I don't have anything to wear, she said, confused. Lorenzo pulled out his phone again. Luca, bring the car and bring the stylist. We have a queen to dress. The transformation of Rebecca Conti was not a matter of magic, but of mechanics. It took 3 hours, a team of 2 silent women who worked with the efficiency of surgeons, and a dress that cost more than Rebecca had earned in her entire life, waitressing at Mick's diner. When she finally stepped out of the bathroom of the hotel suite Luca had secured, Lorenzo stopped pouring his drink. He stared. The woman standing before him was not the waitress in the grease-stained apron. She was a weapon sheathed in emerald green silk. The dress hugged her frame, a slit running up the thigh with a neckline that was daring but commanded respect rather than cheap attention. Her dark hair fell in calculated waves, and her lips were painted a deep blood red. But it was her eyes that caught him. They were still the eyes of the girl who had stitched a bullet hole with a sewing kit, sharp assessing and utterly fearless. You clean up well, Rebecca, Lorenzo said, his voice low. He handed her a glass of champagne. Drink. It will steady your hands. My hands are steady, she replied, ignoring the glass. She walked to the mirror and picked up the mask. It was a half-face mask covered in black feathers and emerald stones. Tell me the plan again. Simple, Lorenzo said, adjusting the cuffs of his tuxedo. He looked every inch the king he claimed to be. The injury in his side was bound tight, hidden beneath layers of expensive fabric. We walk in. We let Stefano finish his speech. We let him think he has the crown, and then we take it off his head. And if they start shooting at the Pierre Hotel during the mayor's charity gala, Lorenzo smirked. These are civilized gangsters, Rebecca. They kill in alleyways, not in ballrooms. Tonight is about politics. It is about perception. If I walk in alive, Stefano looks weak. If he looks weak, his support crumbles. Power is a shadow on the wall, and tonight I cast the bigger shadow. They took the private elevator down to the garage where a black armored SUV waited. Luca was behind the wheel, his face grim. He handed Lorenzo a small earpiece. The room is full, boss, Luca reported as they merged into the New York traffic. Stefano has the heads of the 5 families there. The Russians are there. Even the Triad sent a representative. He's going to announce the merger of your territory with his own. He is a greedy child, Lorenzo muttered. He looked at Rebecca. When we enter, you do not speak unless I ask you to. You are a mystery. Let them wonder who you are. Wonder is a form of fear. The Pierre Hotel was a fortress of light and music. The grand ballroom was a sea of tuxedos and gowns, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the underlying copper tang of tension. A string quartet played Mozart, trying to drown out the murmurs of conspiracy. At the head of the room on a raised dais stood Stefano Moretti. He was handsome in a slimy, polished way, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He held a microphone, basking in the attention of the city's underworld elite. "Friends, brothers," Stefano's voice boomed over the speakers. "We live in difficult times. Uncertainty is the enemy of profit. With the tragic disappearance of my cousin Lorenzo." He paused for dramatic effect, looking appropriately mournful. A few people in the crowd murmured their condolences. "It falls to me to ensure stability." Stefano continued, his voice gaining strength. "Tonight I claim the seat of the capo. Tonight we unite under a new vision." He raised his glass, the room prepared to toast the usurper. The double doors at the back of the ballroom slammed open. The sound was like a gunshot echoing through the hall. The music died instantly. Every head turned. Lorenzo Valenti stood there, framed by the doorway. He didn't look like a dead man. He looked like a storm making landfall. And on his arm was a woman in emerald green who looked like she could burn the city down. "Put the glass down, Stefano." Lorenzo's voice carried across the silent room without a microphone. "It's not your birthday." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Glasses shattered on the floor as hands went limp from shock. Stefano went pale, the color draining from his face as if someone had pulled a plug. "Lorenzo." Stefano stammered, the microphone picking up his fear. "But we buried you." "You buried an empty box," Lorenzo said, beginning the long walk to the stage. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea. Rebecca walked beside him, her chin high, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Don't trip," she told herself. "Don't look at their faces. Look at Stefano. Look at the man who killed your father." Lorenzo stopped at the base of the stairs. He looked up at his cousin. "You have been busy, cousin, dividing my assets, selling my roots, and trying to put a bullet in my heart." Stefano's shock was replaced by the cornered desperation of a rat. He looked around the room, gauging his support. He saw the doubt in the eyes of the other bosses. He knew he had to act, or he was dead. "He is an imposter," Stefano shouted, pointing a shaking finger. "Or he is a traitor. Look who he brings with him." Stefano's eyes locked onto Rebecca. He didn't recognize her face. She had been a child when he killed her father, but he recognized a weakness he could exploit. "That woman," Stefano sneered, desperate to shift the narrative. "I saw her come in. She isn't one of us. She looks like street trash, dressed in stolen silk." "Lorenzo has lost his mind. He brings outsiders into our sanctuary." Lorenzo felt Rebecca tense beside him. He placed a hand over hers, a silent command to hold steady. "This woman," Lorenzo said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low timbre that forced everyone to lean in, "is the reason I am standing here. She is the one who pulled your bullet out of me, Stefano, and she is not an outsider." Lorenzo turned to the crowd, addressing the heads of the 5 families directly. "Allow me to introduce my fiancée." Lorenzo lied smoothly, the words hanging in the air like smoke. "Rebecca Conti." The name hit Stefano like a physical blow. His eyes widened in genuine horror. He remembered the name. He remembered the bookkeeper. "Conti?" Stefano whispered the microphone, capturing his trembling breath. Giovanni's brat, the daughter of the man you murdered. Rebecca spoke for the first time. Her voice was clear, ringing with a bell-like clarity that silenced the room. And I am here to witness your fall. The room erupted into whispers. In the Mafia, killing a civilian bookkeeper was frowned upon. It brought heat, but failing to kill the witness. That was incompetence, and incompetence was a death sentence. Stefano's face twisted. He realized he had lost the room. He reached into his jacket, not for a gun, but for a phone. "Kill them!" Stefano screamed to his bodyguards. "Kill them all!" The ballroom descended into chaos. The civilized veneer of the Pierre Hotel evaporated in seconds. Stefano's personal guard, 4 men loyal only to his payroll, drew their weapons. But Lorenzo had anticipated this. Before the first barrel could be leveled, the waiters who had been circulating with trays of champagne dropped their trays and drew Uzis from beneath their serving jackets. Luca had been busy. "Down!" Lorenzo roared, shoving Rebecca to the floor behind a heavy marble pillar. Gunfire erupted, shattering the crystal chandeliers above. Shards of glass rained down like diamonds, mixing with the panic of the screaming guests. It wasn't a war, it was a distraction. Lorenzo pulled his own weapon, a sleek Beretta, and fired 2 shots over the railing, suppressing Stefano's men. "We need to move!" Lorenzo yelled over the noise. "The kitchen exit!" He grabbed Rebecca's hand and they ran. They moved in a crouch, weaving through the overturned tables. Rebecca's heels were impossible to run in. She kicked them off, running barefoot over the broken glass, adrenaline numbing the cuts on her feet. They burst through the swinging doors of the kitchen, startling the chefs. Luca was already there, holding the back door open, his suit jacket dusted with plaster. "Car is running," Luca shouted. They piled into the armored SUV, just as Stefano's men burst into the alleyway. Bullets pinged harmlessly off the reinforced glass as Luca slammed the accelerator. The heavy vehicle roared, tearing out of the alley and onto 5th Avenue. Lorenzo sat back, breathing hard. He checked Rebecca immediately. "Are you hit?" "No!" She gasped, her chest heaving. She looked down at her feet, bleeding slightly from the glass. "My shoes. I liked those shoes." Lorenzo let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound of relief. "I will buy you 1,000 pairs. You did well, Rebecca." "He knows," Rebecca said, her hands shaking now that the danger was immediate. "He knows who I am. He won't stop." "Neither will I," Lorenzo promised. "Luca, take us to the safe house in the Hamptons. The city is going to burn tonight. We need to regroup." The drive to the Hamptons was silent and tense. The adrenaline crash left them both exhausted. Lorenzo watched Rebecca as she stared out the window at the passing lights. She was no longer just a tool for his survival. She was a partner in this madness. And that lie the fiancé claim, it sat between them heavy and unspoken. The safe house was a modern architectural marvel of glass and steel, perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean. It was isolated, defensible, and cold. Inside, Lorenzo poured 2 stiff drinks. He handed one to Rebecca, who was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the black ocean. "You shouldn't stand near the glass," Lorenzo said gently. "It's bulletproof, isn't it?" "Everything in my life is bulletproof, except for the people," Lorenzo said. He walked over to her. "Tonight changed everything. Stefano is desperate. He has lost face. The commission will not back him now, but he has money, and he has mercenaries. He will come for us." Rebecca turned to face him. The moonlight washed over her, turning the emerald dress almost black. "Why did you say I was your fiancé?" Lorenzo swirled his drink. To give you immunity. In our world, wives and fiancées are off limits usually. It buys us time. And it gave you a status that Stefano couldn't attack without insulting the other families. It was a lie, she said. Was it? Lorenzo stepped closer. The air between them shifted, charged with the electricity of near death. We are bound by blood now, Rebecca. You saved my life. I saved yours. In the old country, that is a bond deeper than marriage. He reached out his hand, brushing a stray lock of hair from her cheek. His touch was surprisingly gentle for a man who had just shot his way out of a ballroom. Rebecca didn't pull away. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing for a brief second. I don't know who I am anymore, she whispered. I'm not a waitress. I'm not a killer. I'm just... You are a survivor, Lorenzo said firmly, and you are with me. He leaned in his intention clear. But before their lips could meet, the lights in the house died. Pitch blackness swallowed the room. Get down, Lorenzo hissed, tackling her to the floor. A second later, the bulletproof glass wall shattered inward with a deafening crash. A rocket-propelled grenade had impacted the frame. The explosion threw them across the room. Lorenzo covered Rebecca's body with his own as debris rained down. Ears ringing, he rolled off her, pulling his gun. Luca! He shouted into his comms. Static. Figures were rappelling down from the roof. They were dressed in tactical black, wearing night vision goggles. These weren't Mafia thugs. These were professionals. Stefano had hired a private military contractor. Bedroom, Lorenzo commanded, dragging Rebecca up. Panic room. Go. I'm not leaving you, Rebecca shouted, grabbing a heavy glass sculpture from a side table. This isn't a debate. Lorenzo shoved her toward the hallway. A laser sight swept across Lorenzo's chest. He dove to the left as a spray of automatic fire chewed up the expensive rug. He fired back, blindly hitting one of the attackers in the leg. Rebecca didn't run to the panic room. She ran to the kitchen. She remembered the layout from when they arrived. There was a knife block, but more importantly, there was the gas main switch for the fireplace. She slid across the kitchen floor, dodging gunfire that shredded the cabinets above her head. She reached the valve and twisted it open, the hiss of gas filling the room. Then she grabbed a bottle of high-proof rum from the counter and a box of matches. "Lorenzo, cover your ears!" she screamed. Lorenzo, hearing the hiss of gas, understood instantly. He scrambled backward into the hallway, covering his head. Rebecca lit the match and threw the bottle toward the living room, where the mercenaries were advancing. The explosion was a concussive boom that shook the foundation of the house. A fireball rolled through the living room, consuming the oxygen and the attackers. The shockwave knocked Rebecca flat against the refrigerator. Silence followed, broken only by the crackle of flames and the groans of dying men. Lorenzo staggered into the kitchen, his face covered in soot. He found Rebecca dazed but alive. He pulled her into his arms, checking her frantically for injuries. "You are crazy," he breathed, his voice filled with awe. "You blew up my house." "I hated the decor anyway." She coughed, wiping ash from her face. "Boss." Luca's voice came from the back door. He was limping, bleeding from a shoulder wound, but holding an assault rifle. "We have to go. That was just the first wave. They have a chopper inbound." They scrambled out the back, heading into the dense woods that surrounded the property. The sound of helicopter blades thumped rhythmically in the distance, getting louder. They were hunted. They were outnumbered. And they had nowhere left to run. "Where do we go?" Rebecca asked, struggling to keep pace as they navigated the dark forest. "You said the city wasn't safe. The safe house is gone." Lorenzo stopped for a moment, listening to the approaching chopper. He looked at Rebecca, his eyes hard as flint. "We stop running," Lorenzo said. "We go to the one place Stefano will never look. The one place he thinks he owns. Where? His mother's house," Lorenzo said. "We are going to New Jersey." New Jersey was quiet. The suburb where Stefano's mother, Aunt Maria, lived was a sanctuary of manicured lawns and terracotta statues of the Virgin Mary. It was neutralized ground. By the ancient laws of Cosa Nostra, the homes of mothers were sacred. No blood could be spilled there. It was a gamble, a desperate, insane gamble. They stole a car, a nondescript Ford sedan, from a gas station, 3 miles from the burning safe house. Lorenzo drove his knuckles white on the wheel. Rebecca sat in the passenger seat, the adrenaline fading into a cold, shivering shock. "She won't help us," Rebecca said. "She's his mother." "She is a Valenti before she is a Moretti," Lorenzo corrected. "And she raised me just as much as she raised him. She knows the rules. If Stefano broke the tudos, hiring mercenaries and attacking a made man without commission approval, she will know he has signed his own death warrant." They arrived at the house at 4:00 a.m. It was a modest 2-story brick house with a statue of a lion at the gate. Lorenzo didn't knock. He used a key hidden under a loose brick in the garden path, a key that had been there for 20 years. They entered the kitchen. It smelled of basil and old wood. "Lorenzo!" a voice called from the top of the stairs. Maria Moretti descended wearing a floral housecoat, a shotgun in her hands. She was 70 years old, with eyes that had seen everything and forgotten nothing. She saw Lorenzo covered in soot and dried blood. She saw Rebecca barefoot and in a ruined gown. Maria lowered the shotgun. "I saw the news. They said there was a gas leak in the Hamptons." "Stefano sent a hit squad, Zia," Lorenzo said, leaning heavily on the kitchen island. "He tried to kill me. Again." Maria's face tightened. She looked at her nephew, then at the strange woman. "And this is the girl, the one from the party. This is Rebecca. She saved me." Maria looked at Rebecca for a long moment. Then she walked over and placed the shotgun on the table. She took Rebecca's face in her hands. "You have his eyes," Maria said softly. "Giovanni's." Rebecca gasped. "You knew him." "I knew everyone, child. I told Stefano to leave your father alone. He didn't listen. My son, he has a sickness in his soul. Greed has eaten him." Maria turned away, crossing herself. "He called me an hour ago. He said you were dead. He said he was coming here to collect the family ledger." Lorenzo stiffened. "The ledger, the black book," Maria explained. "The one your father kept. The one that lists every judge, every politician, every dirty cop on the payroll for the last 40 years. Stefano thinks if he has that, the commission can't touch him. He thinks he can blackmail the world." "Where is it?" Lorenzo asked. "In the basement, in the wine cellar, behind the vintage Chianti." "We need to get it and go," Lorenzo said. "If he's coming here, he is already here." Rebecca said, her voice trembling. She was looking out the window. 3 black SUVs pulled into the driveway, blocking their exit. Lorenzo cursed. He grabbed the shotgun from the table. "Zia, go to your room. Lock the door." "No," Maria said, sitting down at the kitchen table. She smoothed her housecoat. "Make me coffee, Lorenzo. I am not hiding in my own house." The front door burst open. Stefano walked in, flanked by 4 men. He looked triumphant, manic. He wore a trench coat, wet with rain. He stopped when he saw them. He saw Lorenzo holding the shotgun. He saw Rebecca holding a steak knife she had grabbed from the counter, and he saw his mother sitting calmly at the table. "Mama," Stefano said, his smile faltering. "You have guests." "I have family," Maria said coldly. "You should have knocked." "It's over, Lorenzo." Stefano sneered, ignoring her. "You have nowhere to go. Give me the book, and maybe I'll let you die quickly." "You broke the rules, Stefano," Lorenzo said, keeping the gun leveled at his cousin's chest. "You brought war to your mother's house." "I am the rules," Stefano screamed, losing his composure. "I am the future. You are a relic. You and your codes of honor. They are dust. Money is the only code." He signaled his men to raise their weapons. "Wait." Rebecca stepped forward. She put the knife down on the table. The metal clattered loudly. "Rebecca, what are you doing?" Lorenzo hissed. Rebecca looked at Stefano. "You want the book? I know where it is. I'll get it for you." Lorenzo stared at her in betrayal. "Rebecca." "I want to live, Lorenzo," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. She looked at Stefano. "If I give you the book, you let me walk away. Deal." Stefano laughed, a cruel barking sound. "Smart girl. She knows a sinking ship when she sees one. Go get it. You have 2 minutes." Rebecca walked past Lorenzo. She didn't look at him. She walked to the basement door and descended into the darkness. Lorenzo felt a coldness in his chest that had nothing to do with the gun pointed at him. Had he been wrong? Had he trusted too easily? Down in the basement, Rebecca moved fast. She found the loose stone behind the wine rack. She pulled out the ledger. It was heavy, bound in leather. But she didn't just take the ledger. She reached into her pocket. She still had the lighter from the safe house. She opened the ledger. The pages were dry, old paper. She flicked the lighter. "I'm sorry, Papa," she whispered. She set the book on fire. She watched it burn for a few seconds, waiting until the flames caught the wooden wine rack. The alcohol stored there would act as an accelerant. She ran back up the stairs, screaming. "It's not there. It's gone." "What?" Stefano roared. "The shelf. It's empty." Rebecca burst into the kitchen, looking terrified. "Someone took it." Stefano's eyes bulged. "Liar!" He shoved past his men, running toward the basement door. "If you are lying, I will skin you alive." Stefano ran down the stairs. His men hesitated, unsure whether to follow him or guard the prisoners. That hesitation was all Lorenzo needed. The moment Stefano disappeared into the basement, Lorenzo swung the shotgun up. He didn't shoot the men. He shot the ceiling fixture, a heavy crystal chandelier, directly above them. It crashed down, pinning 2 of the men. Lorenzo pumped the shotgun and fired the second shell into the knee of the 3rd man. From the basement, a scream erupted, not of anger, but of panic. "Fire! Help me!" The fire Rebecca had started had caught the alcohol vapors. The basement was a furnace. Lorenzo grabbed Rebecca and his aunt. "Out now!" They ran out the back door into the garden just as the basement windows blew out, spewing black smoke. Stefano's men scrambled out of the house, dragging their injured comrades, forgetting all about the hit. Their boss was trapping himself. Lorenzo stopped at the garden gate. He looked back at the house. He could hear Stefano screaming his name. "Go help him," Maria said, tears streaming down her face. "Please, Lorenzo. He is my son." Lorenzo looked at the burning house, then at Rebecca. Rebecca looked back at him, her face hard. "He killed my father," she said. Lorenzo looked at his aunt. I cannot save him from the fire he built himself, Zia. But Lorenzo was a man of honor, perhaps too much. He handed the shotgun to Rebecca. Watch the door. He ran back toward the house. Not to the door, but to the garden hose. He smashed the basement window with a rock and shoved the hose inside, turning the water on full blast. It wasn't much, but it might buy Stefano seconds. Then sirens wailed in the distance. The fire department. The police. Lorenzo ran back to Rebecca. We have to leave. Now. Is he dead? Rebecca asked, as they sprinted into the darkness of the neighbor's yard. I don't know, Lorenzo said, but the book is gone. His leverage is gone. Even if he survives, he is finished. They disappeared into the night, leaving the burning house behind them. 3 weeks had passed since the fire in New Jersey. The underworld of New York was in a state of suspended animation, holding its breath. Lorenzo and Rebecca were hiding in a cabin deep in the Adirondacks. It was a hunting lodge that belonged to an old associate who owed Lorenzo a favor from the 90s. The air was crisp, smelling of pine and impending snow. It was a world away from the grime of the diner and the blood of the gala. For the first time in his life, Lorenzo Valenti was not working. There were no phones here, no internet. Just a fireplace, a stockpile of food, and the woman who had upended his existence. The dynamic between them had shifted. They were no longer boss and civilian, nor savior and survivor. They were simply a man and a woman, sharing a small space while the world outside hunted them. Lorenzo sat by the fire, sharpening a hunting knife. He watched Rebecca as she read a book by the window. The bruises on her face had faded, but the wariness in her eyes remained. You haven't asked about him, Lorenzo said, breaking the silence. Rebecca didn't look up. Stefano, I assume he's dead. The fire was intense. Luca drove up to the perimeter drop box this morning, Lorenzo said. He left a report. Rebecca closed the book. She turned to him, her expression unreadable. And Stefano is alive. Rebecca let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for weeks. How? My aunt's basement had a storm shelter, an old Cold War edition. He crawled into it. He survived the fire, but not without a cost. Luca says half his face is gone. He wears a mask now. He calls himself Il Fantasma Tasmo, the ghost. He's not a ghost, Rebecca said, her voice hard. He's a monster. He is a monster with no leverage, Lorenzo corrected. You burned the book. Without that ledger, he cannot blackmail the commission. The 5 families are already circling him like sharks. He is losing territory. He is bleeding money. Then why are we still hiding? Rebecca asked. She stood up and walked over to him. She took the knife from his hand and set it on the table. Why are we sitting here while he breathes? Lorenzo looked up at her. Because I wanted to give you this. Peace. Even if just for a few weeks. Once we go back, Rebecca, there is no us in the quiet sense. There is only the Don and his wife. The target on my back becomes a target on yours. I never asked for peace, Rebecca whispered. She knelt between his legs, her hands resting on his knees. I spent 5 years waiting for justice. Peace is boring, Lorenzo. I want my life back, and I can't have it while he is out there. Lorenzo reached out, tracing the line of her jaw. You are dangerous, Rebecca Conti. I learned from the best. He kissed her then. It wasn't the desperate, adrenaline-fueled near kiss of the safe house. It was slow, deliberate, and possessive. It was a seal of a different kind of pact. In that cabin, with the snow beginning to fall outside, they crossed the final line. They stopped being allies and became lovers. But the morning brought reality. Lorenzo woke before dawn. He packed the bag. He cleaned the guns. When Rebecca woke, he was dressed in the only suit he had left. "We go back today," Lorenzo said. "Good," Rebecca said, pulling the blankets off. "I was getting tired of the fresh air." "There is one thing," Lorenzo said, pausing at the door. "Stefano has called a meeting, a sit-down. He claims he has a digital copy of the ledger. He is lying, of course, but fear makes men stupid. The families are listening to him. He wants to meet at the construction site of the new Valenti Casino on the waterfront." "A trap," Rebecca said. "Obviously. But it is also a stage, and I intend to put on a show." Lorenzo looked at her. "You are not coming to the site, Rebecca. It is too dangerous." Rebecca laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "You think I burned that book just to sit in the car? I'm coming, and I know exactly how to break him." "How?" Rebecca smiled, and it was the smile of the wolf that had caught the scent. "Because I didn't just burn the book, Lorenzo. I read the last page before I threw it in the fire." The skeleton of the Valenti Casino rose 50 stories into the grey New York sky. It was a monument to money laundering, steel, and ambition. Tonight, it was a battleground. The wind whipped off the Hudson River, cold and biting. The construction elevator rattled as it ascended to the unfinished penthouse floor. It was an open deck of concrete, exposed to the elements, surrounded by construction netting. Stefano Moretti stood near the edge. He wore a long black coat and a white ceramic mask that covered the right side of his face. Behind him stood a dozen mercenaries, the remnants of his paid army. Opposite him stood the representatives of the other families. They looked uncomfortable, their coats flapping in the wind. They were there for the digital drive Stefano promised. The elevator dinged. The doors slid open. Lorenzo Valenti stepped out. He was alone. Or so it seemed. "Cousin," Stefano rasped. His voice was different now, damaged by smoke and rage. "You have 9 lives, but I think you just used the last one." "And you have no face," Lorenzo countered, walking calmly onto the concrete deck. "Take off the mask, Stefano. Let the families see what betrayal looks like." "I have the drive," Stefano shouted, holding up a small silver USB stick. "Everything is here, every bribe, every body. If you touch me, this goes to the FBI." The representatives shuffled nervously. They were terrified of the information, but they were also terrified of Lorenzo. "There is no drive," Lorenzo said, stopping 10 paces away. Rebecca burned the book. There was no time to scan it. "You are bluffing." "You want to bet your empire on that?" Stefano sneered. "Kill him," he ordered his men. "Wait." The voice came from the stairwell door. Rebecca stepped out. She wasn't wearing a gown this time. She wore dark jeans boots and a heavy leather jacket. She looked like a soldier. "Rebecca." Stefano laughed. "The little waitress. The arsonist." "The witness," Rebecca corrected. She walked to stand beside Lorenzo. She looked at the representatives of the 5 families. "There is no digital copy. But he's right about one thing. The information survives." She tapped her temple. "I have a photographic memory. I saw the last page of the ledger. The summary page." Stefano stiffened. "She lies." "Do I?" Rebecca turned to the stout man on the left, Don Falcone. "Falcone, 1998. The waste management contract. You buried 3 union reps in the foundation of the bridge. The names were Miller, O'Shea, and Klein." Falcone's face went white. She turned to the next man. "Russo, 2005. The Port Authority bribes. You paid $2 million to a councilman named Higgins. He died of a heart attack a week later. The men on the deck were frozen. She was reciting their darkest secrets from memory. And you, Stefano? Rebecca turned her gaze to the masked man. The last entry, the one your mother wrote down before she died of grief, because she knew what you were. Shut up, Stefano screamed, raising his gun. She wrote that you were skimming from the pension fund, Rebecca shouted over the wind. Stealing from your own men, from the widows and orphans of the soldiers who died for this family. That was the kill shot. In the Mafia, killing enemies is business. Killing civilians is sloppy. But stealing from the family pot, stealing from the widows, that was a sin unforgivable by God or man. The mercenaries behind Stefano exchanged glances. They were hired guns, but even they had a code. And more importantly, they realized Stefano couldn't pay them if he was broke. It's a lie, Stefano shrieked. He aimed his gun at Rebecca. Lorenzo moved. He didn't go for his gun. He lunged forward, tackling Stefano. The two men hit the concrete hard. The gun skittered away toward the edge. They rolled, punching and clawing. It was primal. It wasn't a fight for territory anymore. It was Cain and Abel on a rooftop. Stefano was younger, but Lorenzo was fueled by a cold, disciplined rage. He pinned Stefano down, ripping the white mask off his face. The skin underneath was a ruin of scar tissue, red and angry. Stefano screamed, trying to cover his face. Lorenzo stood up, breathing hard. He straightened his jacket. He looked down at his cousin. You are not a boss, Stefano. You are just a burn victim with a stolen credit card. Stefano scrambled for the gun near the edge. He grabbed it, rolling onto his back, aiming at Lorenzo. Die, bang! The shot didn't come from Stefano. Rebecca stood 10 feet away, Lorenzo's beretta in her hand, smoke curling from the barrel. Stefano Moretti jerked. A small red hole appeared in the center of his chest. He looked at Rebecca, his eyes wide with shock. He gasped, the gun falling from his hand. He slumped back, his head lolling over the edge of the building. He slid. Gravity took him. He fell silently into the 50-story abyss of the city he tried to conquer. Lorenzo looked at Rebecca. She lowered the gun, her hands trembling slightly, but her face dry. You stole my kill, Lorenzo said softly. He killed my father, Rebecca replied. It was my right. Lorenzo turned to the mercenaries. Leave, now. They didn't argue. They dropped their weapons and fled to the stairwell. Lorenzo looked at the representatives of the 5 families. They were staring at Rebecca with a mixture of fear and awe. The girl, Don Falcone started, his voice shaky. She knows too much. The names, the dates. Lorenzo walked over to Rebecca. He put his arm around her waist, pulling her close. He looked the men in the eye. She is not the girl, Lorenzo announced, his voice echoing over the construction site. She is Mrs. Valenti, my consigliere, and the keeper of the secrets. He paused, letting the threat sink in. As long as we are at peace, Lorenzo said, her memory stays closed. But if you come for us, she will sing like a canary to the federal agents. Do we have an understanding? Falcone swallowed hard. He nodded. We have an understanding, Don Valenti. Good, Lorenzo said. Now get off my construction site. 6 months later, the grease-stained diner was gone, reborn, as Giovanni's, a sleek bistro. Rebecca sat in her old booth, not as a waitress, but as the owner, a massive diamond glinting on her finger. Lorenzo entered, placing a cheap paper cup on the table, a tribute to where they met. The commission wants to host a dinner, he said, admiring her. They want to pay respects to the new queen. Tell them I'm busy, Rebecca replied, checking her inventory. She wasn't just a wife. She was a power equal to him. Lorenzo chuckled, leaning in. You know I never thanked you for spilling that coffee. Rebecca looked up, a mischievous glint in her eyes. I didn't spill it by accident, Lorenzo. I saw the blood on your suit through the window. I dropped the pot to distract Mick, so I could get to you first. Lorenzo froze, realizing he hadn't just found a wife. He had married a mastermind. He hadn't saved a damsel. She had caught a king. Rebecca climbed onto his lap, whispering in the dialect that started it all. Tutto quello che vogliamo, amore mio. Anything we want. The war was over. The world was theirs. And that is the story of Rebecca and Lorenzo. From a desperate waitress to the queen of the New York underworld, she proved that loyalty isn't bought, it's earned, and sometimes revenge is a dish best served with a side of bad coffee. I hope you enjoyed this roller coaster of drama, romance, and mafia justice. This was a long journey, and if you stuck around until the very end, you are the real MVP. Here is my question for you. If you were in Rebecca's shoes, would you have burned the black book to save yourself, or kept it for power? Let me know your theory in the comments below. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please smash that like button. It really helps the algorithm find more story lovers like you. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell, so you're the first to know when our next drama drops. Thanks for watching and stay safe out there.